at the Integrated Water Management webinar, which is the first webinar of a very exciting series that we've been working diligently to develop. So today is really an introductory webinar. What is integrated water management and how can it benefit your community and your river? So this webinar will last about 75 minutes. You can use the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen to communicate with the speakers. And so just do that as questions pop up for you, and we'll stop periodically to make sure to have a chance for the presenters to answer those. So for those of you who are new to River Network, again, my name is Diana Toledo. I am the director of the Leadership Management Program. And I am based out of North Carolina, and I have my colleague here, and I'll turn it to her here in a minute, Catherine Baer, also of North Carolina, on our staff. So if you're new to River Network, just a brief introduction. Our national organization is 28 years old, and over those almost 3 decades, we've filled a unique niche in the environmental community by focusing really on the 2,000 plus river and watershed organizations that work across all levels, local, state, and national levels as well. But we also strive to engage a much broader community to support healthy rivers, and I know many of you here in the room represent those other interests, so we'll get a sense of who's in the room in a minute. And today our focus is really structured around 3 strategic areas that we feel are most important for healthy rivers: clean water, ample water, and strong champions. And so we aim to support our community by providing them access to proven best practices related to those 3 areas through webinars such as this one, through our website, through our annual conference, River Rally, publications, outreach, et cetera. So we are very happy to have you join us here. This is, as I said, the first webinar of a series, and we are lucky to have the support of the Pisces Foundation's water program, and it's with their support that we're able to offer this webinar free of charge. This webinar is also sponsored by the Urban Waters Learning Network, which, if you're not familiar with the network, it's a peer-to-peer network of people and organizations that are working around urban rivers and the communities around them. And so we have a separate website for that. Please take a look, urbanwaterslearningnetwork.org, if you are working in an urban context and would like to learn more about that peer network. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody in the room that we are a membership organization, and so if you're not a member, we encourage you to become one. Right now we are offering a 17-month membership for the price of 12. So with a membership now, and you have the link there at the bottom of your slide, you can have access to all sorts of benefits, discounts to paid webinar series, online publications, rally, conference discounts, and scholarships, et cetera. And so by joining today, you can get a scholarship and a discount to even next year's rally, which is scheduled in May in Grand Rapids, Michigan for the 2017 rally. So please take a look at that link below if you're not a member, and we'd love to have you join us, whether it's as an organization, as a professional, as a business, et cetera. So without further ado, sounds like Randy, I will email you. Sounds like somebody's lost sound. I will contact him here. Without further ado, I want to turn it over to Catherine Baer, who really has been the brain behind this webinar series, to introduce the series and our speakers. So Catherine.
Thanks, Diana. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. This is Catherine Baer. I'm Director of the Science and Policy Program, and I'm calling today in from North Carolina, not the same location as Diana, unfortunately, but both in this good state. So thank you for being here. Really excited about this series and this kickoff event today. And we started this series because we really realized that integrated water management has been defined in so many different ways. But given all the pressure on water resources we're seeing through population increases, climate change, aging infrastructure, that really communities around the world, but certainly in the U.S., have been turning to different forms of what we're calling integrated water management. And doing it really, as you'll hear throughout the series, because it tends to be aimed to be a multi-benefit solution that really can increase environmental, economic, and social outcomes, ideally, including things like watershed and human health, economic opportunities, quality of life, and increased resilience to climate change. So it's really been defined broadly, and now that's catching on, and we hear about different examples around the country, but especially in urban areas. River Network was really interested in providing a series on the concepts, but really on how it's being applied, so we could help deepen the level of knowledge and engagement within our community of people working on river, water, and community issues, and provide a place to start that conversation and opportunities for people to engage further in their own communities where this may not yet have caught on. So this is, it's put a working definition up there, just sort of, we took from a nice publication that came out earlier this year, and it really kind of emphasizes both the approach, the process part, breaking down silos, and the multiple benefit and equity components of integrated water management, which I think are really important. Our two speakers today will also provide different takes on these definitions, but what we've asked people to do across our series, because although definitions are important, it really kind of comes down to, well, how is it applied? What does it mean on the ground? So for every webinar, we've asked all of our speakers to answer and think about questions like, how was the community engaged? Did it impact, or how did it impact equity? What were the drivers that created the opportunity for integrated water management? What were the funding sources? Did it open up new funding sources? And then really talk about two tools and resources. How are people measuring this, and what are the opportunities and links to climate change? So those are some of the components hopefully you'll hear throughout these series. We'll provide more information about how to sign up for the rest of the series at the end of this webinar today, but our next one will be on September 14th. And we'll take a look at integrated water management as driven by or catalyzed by sewage pollution and sewage overflows. And then in October, followed by a webinar on integrated water management that's catalyzed by water scarcity, followed by two more later in the winter on flooding and drinking water. So we hope that you will join us for those as well. So let's go ahead and get started today. We have two fabulous speakers. I'm so excited they are both willing to join us. So let me go ahead and introduce them. First, we've got Lynn Broaddus, who is the chair of our board here at River Network, but Lynn's also president of the Broadview Collaborative. She serves as an advisor to private sector, nonprofit, and government clients on water concerns. Lynn, before that, led the Johnson Foundation's Environment Program from 2008 to 2014, where she convened hundreds of national leaders to address national water sustainability, resiliency, resulting in more than a dozen publications, many of which you probably have seen. And before that, Lynn served as executive director of Milwaukee Riverkeeper, worked with the Nature Conservancy and NatureServe, as well as with energy conservation and teaching. She earned her PhD in botany and genetics from Duke, her MBA from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and her BA bachelor's degree in environmental sciences from UVA. Additionally, to working with River Network, Lynn's also vice chair of the Board of Visitors for the Nelson Institute of Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a trustee for the Water Environment Federation, as well as a non-resident fellow with the Metropolitan Policy Program of the Brookings Institution. Our second speaker today will be Teresa Connor, who's a project development officer with One Water Solutions Institute at Colorado State University. We're looking forward to letting everyone know about these great programs she's working on. Teresa joined the One Water Solutions Institute in 2015. The mission of the Institute is to connect Colorado State University's world-class research to real water challenges, and they work on things including the Water Innovation Network, agricultural conservation efforts, and water issues and connections to food and energy throughout the world. Prior to her work at Colorado State University, Teresa worked for 2 years at the Water Environment Research Foundation in metropolitan D.C., where she directed the Sustainable Integrated Water Research Challenge for WERF, developing partnerships with diverse entities such as the American Planning Association and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry. And prior to that, Teresa spent 14 years at Sarasota County, Florida, including 8 years as the utility director, where she was responsible for the water, wastewater, reclaimed water, stormwater, and solid waste utility systems in the Natural Resources Department. Teresa led an integrated water initiative that brought all these together, all utility systems together, with natural resources to develop watershed plans that address water quality, water supply, restoring flows to oyster habitat, and developing cover material for the landfill. Teresa has a master's degree in environmental engineering from Iowa State University and an MBA from Webster University. So as you can see, both our speakers today really bring a wealth of knowledge and experience with integrated water management, so I'm really pleased to have them with us. We will be taking question and answers at the end, but please, as we go along, put your questions in the chat box, and if you have a question specific to, clarification on something that either Lynn or Teresa is saying, we will go ahead and take that during the presentation. So feel free to add in, and Deanna and I will be keeping a list of all your questions throughout. So thanks again, and I'm going to turn it now. We'll turn it now over to Lynn.
All right, great. They can hear me there, and it's great to be here. And I think of I'm excited to hear about the full spectrum of programs that will be offered as part of this series, and it's an honor and some fun to get to kick things off. So let me just start with, let me ask, Deanna, are we going to have a poll in here, or how does that work? Are we?
Yeah, I will pull up the first poll right now.
Okay, all right, great. So we do want to get a sense of who's in the room with us. So if you can just take a quick second to answer this question, and you can, I don't remember if you can enter more than one answer or not, but
not on this one, no.
Not on this one, okay. So it looks like the majority of our participants are from nonprofit organizations, although we have a nice showing from government and a little bit from utilities and what is that? Academia. So that's great. Thanks, Deanna. And do we want to pull up that second question as well, just to finish out who's in the room with us? And then we also were curious, like, do you work at a national or local or somewhere in between? And this one you can answer more than one, check off more than one box there if that's appropriate. So it looks like we've got a nice spread across there, a pretty somewhat even distribution, but great. Well, it's nice to see those. Looks like those answers are pretty much in. Thank you, everybody. Let me, I just want to start off, at some level, I think we all know that water is integrated across its various forms. It's up in the sky, it comes down as rain or snow, it runs off the ground, it goes into the ground, it becomes parts of plants and animals, it's released with decomposition, it flows into rivers, streams, oceans, it's evaporated, and the cycle starts over again. So we like to say there's no new water. That's not entirely exactly precisely correct. As anyone who studied photosynthesis or the Krebs cycle, you know that water is routinely broken down and recreated, but for the most part, we see it moving through these kind of big chunks of phases, the ones that we learned in Earth Sciences class. Now, humans can't alter those basic phases of the water cycle, but we have changed its rhythms by hardening the Earth's surfaces with roofs and roads, even lawns, which absorb less water than native vegetation. We've cut off those routes to infiltration, reduced groundwater recharge. We have faster runoff and bigger floods, while at times of drought we have lower flows and warmer flows because that water isn't moving through the ground, which cools it off. And sometimes isn't shaded as much and that sort of thing, which warms it up. And then along with that comes erosion, loss of filtration capacity, and those sorts of things, leaving us with more work that we as humans need to do on our own, work that the natural infrastructure has in the past done for us. We know that flood frequency and severity is increasing, much of which is because of the activities that we as humans have brought on ourselves. The landscape hardening is the one that was illustrated in the previous slide, but there are other factors. Increased storm intensity is likely due to overall climate changes. Sea level rise, which is in large part because of climate change, but also there's a tiny little sliver of that sea level rise that is actually due to, and it's been measured, due to the massive scale of moving water out of our groundwater reserves into the surface and out through, primarily through our wastewater treatment plants out into the ocean. And that's actually has a measurable contribution to sea level rise as well. Subsidence, the lowering of our ground level, largely due to groundwater withdrawals that vastly exceed the recharge capacity. And this is, there's certain parts of the country where subsidence has a big contribution in terms of exacerbating flooding, primarily in Florida and in some of the regions around the Chesapeake Bay and probably other parts of the country as well. But it's not just pavement and rooftops that have entered into our consideration of the water cycle. We now have a number of other pieces that we need to integrate in with our thinking about water. Water treatment and distribution for our various uses in the buildings, reservoirs for storing water either above or below ground, the water running through our buildings and industries for consumption, cooling, manufacturing processes, et cetera, and of course then collecting it back through the collection system so that it can be treated and generally returned to our surface water bodies. This is a traditional setup that we've been working off of and tweaking for the last 80 or so years. We've tended to think of the various components shown here, the water supply, treatment, and distribution, building or premises plumbing, wastewater collection and treatment, and as well as stormwater runoff in separate silos. But more and more communities are finding that they can't really think about these in siloed situations. Here, in fact, is an extreme example of what happens when we avoid thinking about water in an integrated way. This is a picture of it's not the greatest quality picture, but it was a picture of the Passaic Valley, New Jersey sewage treatment plant immediately after Superstorm Sandy back in 2012. And that's one of the nation's largest wastewater treatment plants that serves much of the greater New York population, greater New York City population. And you're looking at it, but it's all underneath that water, completely flooded out after that storm. Took it offline for, I think it was 2 months. And like most treatment plants, it sits at a low spot in the watershed, and it was built without consideration for increased flooding or increased storms, more rapid runoff, that sort of thing. And the results were some pretty catastrophic ramifications for the people of that region. So what is integrated water management anyway? Catherine put up a definition which I really liked back at the beginning of the presentation. And I've shared with you two here, one from the United Nations back in 1977. So people have been thinking about this for quite some time. And bear with me, I'm just going to read it out loud, where integrated water, they actually say integrated water resources management, is a process which promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources in order to maximize the resultant economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising the sustainability of vital ecosystems. I think it's pretty cool to think that that was put together almost 40 years ago. And then another definition, more recent, from the American Rivers website, integrated water management considers the urban water cycle as a single integrated system in which all urban water flows are recognized as potential resources. Integrated water management is practiced through inclusive and jointly planned management of all water systems where all waters are resources and are valued and put to use. And the three kind of things that I pull out of there are very similar to what Catherine mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. One is an integration or coordination of planning, otherwise known as systems thinking. Another component is inclusivity and equity, on the human side of things, making sure that planning benefits from a wide variety of experiences and perspectives. And then also that resources beyond water are considered. It's not, you got to think of water not just in its various phases and forms, but also other resources that we depend on and use. I include this as a reminder. This is an image from a paper a few years ago in the journal Nature, predicting that mega droughts, that we're going to be seeing longer and really catastrophic mega droughts in certain parts of the country in the Southwest and Great Plains. And that's to point out that that we need to be thinking not just in our annual cycles, but we also need to be thinking long-term in terms of our integration of how we bring an integrated approach to water planning, and particularly with climate and long-term climate change, and of course, hopefully trying to mitigate against that long-term climate change in the planning that we do, which is kind of a perfect segue into the water energy nexus, something that I'm proud to say River Network has been working on since before water energy nexus was a sort of common term of art back in the late 2000s. Truly integrated water thinking has to include energy thinking as well. Energy generation and extraction are the largest users of water, and conversely, traditional methods of treating and moving water, both on the intake and the outflow side of the equation, are tremendous users of energy. To maximize progress on water conservation and protection goals, we really do need to focus in on energy conservation and alternative energy sources like wind, which use very little water. Similarly, to achieve the very demanding reductions in greenhouse gases that we need to achieve, we need to leave no stone unturned, and that includes looking at how to reduce energy consumption in the water sector, and to go even further by capturing the energy that's inherently embedded in our sewage. Similarly, a fully integrated approach on water needs to think systematically about the intersection between food and water. There's an expectation that we need to produce more food to meet growing global population demand, yet if we do so with current methods, mainstream methods, that means additional habitat loss, additional pollutants in our surface and groundwaters. This is not only a direct problem, but also ends up putting an additional energy burden on water supply utilities that need to spend more energy and money removing those additional pollutants. Ironically, the additional pollutant load can also reduce fisheries health, thus cutting off one of the really important food supplies that we have traditionally depended on. So in the course of trying to grow more food, improve the food situation on one end, we're cutting off an important supply on the other. And you don't need to look any further than the dead zones of the Chesapeake Bay or Lake Erie or the Gulf of Mexico to see this in play. These are important fisheries for our national stability, and they're severely compromised. Those and others are severely compromised by the pollution loads that they bear. In an integrated approach, we need to think about our food needs hand in hand with our water needs. And of course, we need to think about the impact of irrigation, tile drainage systems, food-based ethanol production, and the list kind of goes on. So I've kind of laid this out with the food and water collision and the energy and water collision. You could also, there are a number of other threads that one could kind of flesh out. The water transportation collision, the water and public health collisions, and there are certainly more slices of this as we think about where water integrates in with other planning needs. And when we do this, when we start looking at those intersections, we really start to see some solutions that are robust under multiple scenarios. And I think here of green infrastructure is certainly one that is probably top of mind on many of your all's regular activities. And we can also think of it as sort of passive infrastructure that requires little to no energy input other than the sun, and which not only helps us to adapt to climate change and increase storm events, but also to mitigate against or heal climate change through absorption of carbon dioxide, shading, cooling, et cetera. And there is a trend in the industry. I'm looking up at the top tier of those photos. There's certainly a trend in the industry to think of natural infrastructure as infrastructure, as our streams and our rivers and our wetlands and our groundwater. Those are all parts of our infrastructure, and it's important to include those in the planning process, and let nature do its work for us as much as possible. Some of the other solutions that that are an inherent part of integrated water planning, generally around conservation and efficiency, both on the water side and the energy side. They go hand in hand. For the first time in decades, we're seeing downward trends in overall water use, which is certainly a good thing, although it can be stressful for individual water utilities from a financial perspective. But we need to find robust financial structures and revenue structures that allow utilities to maintain their operations in a safe and sustainable manner, while also planning for long-term resource sustainability, natural resource sustainability. Another kind of solution that is in the toolbox is rainwater harvesting, and this is one that we don't see quite as much of, but I think we will be seeing more and more. And it ranges from very simple sort of rain barrel kind of thing that you might use for your garden or cleaning off tools and washing the dog, to much more sophisticated operations. The bottom left-hand image is one of a ecology center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which captures rainwater for use in toilet flushing. It really was built as a way to mitigate against stormwater runoff. We see here rainwater harvesting in underground reservoirs for future use as a water supply. And in the top right hand, this is something that I think we'll be seeing more of as it becomes more turnkey and sort of off the shelf, this is a homeowner in outside Austin, Texas, who has a rainwater harvest system, and you see his filtration and ozone or UV tanks for that the water passes through and cleans it. And he's got his own independent off-the-grid water supply, which has a number of advantages for people, especially in distributed situations. In the industry, we see a bigger and bigger push among the utility sector for becoming resource recovery facilities, not so much wastewater treatment plants, but really focusing in on the recovery of energy, nutrients, especially phosphorus, and recovering water from those wastewater treatment, what we have in the previously called wastewater treatment plants. There are a number of utilities that are well on their way or have achieved energy neutrality. In the top left-hand corner is East Bay Municipal Utility District in California. It was the first in the country to become energy neutral, and there are many others that have either achieved that or are well on their way, either through somewhat of it is from harvesting energy from the flows that come through, but also looking at energy conservation and turning to renewable sources such as the bank of solar power that you see here from Auburn, California. We see this is a phosphorus recovery facility here in this. I should be using a little pointer here. Here in this image from I think this one might be from Madison, Wisconsin, but that's a company that subcontracts with utilities to recover phosphorus from their system. We see this image here I just love from DC Water. I don't know if you can read it, but it says "Power from the People." They use the poop from their customers to create energy, and they do a great job of doing that while also creating wonderful biosolids in the process. Another thing that I think we'll be seeing more of and that Teresa's going to touch on is distributed treatment and reuse of water. So at the building scale or district scale, where this image here in the bottom left is from New York City, and I think one of these buildings Teresa's going to reference. But there are a number of those buildings there in the Battery Park City area of New York that have building scale treatment and reuse. And we're especially seeing the huge expansion of this in San Francisco. And then this will obviously, I think, trickle down to other places as well. These are kind of, but some of the solutions, to be honest, we can't yet foresee all the possibilities that lie ahead. But one of the things that we know for sure is that citizen engagement and willingness to advocate for robust, sustainable, new ways of thinking about water as it integrates with all aspects of our lives will be key to finding those very necessary solutions that lie ahead. And it's exciting times, I think. And of course, dependent on people like you all out there doing that hard work to help keep this moving forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa. So.
Yeah, and hey, this is, thank you, Lynn, so much. This is Catherine Baer. Just briefly before, Teresa, we turn it over to you, we are going to do another quick poll just to find out how many folks are in the room with each of you to get a head count, a virtual head count. All right. Great. Most people, like me, on their own. Very good. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so now we're going to turn it over to Teresa, who's going to talk about using existing water opportunities to improve city livability.
All right. Thank you, KB. And thank you, Lynn, for that great kind of intro into this presentation. If anyone has worked for local government, you recognize that you face crisis often, real or unreal. There's always a crisis to be dealt with. And there's an old Chinese proverb that says crisis has two meanings. It can be danger or it can be opportunity. And one of the things that we really need to think about, because many of our water systems do face crisis. We've seen the flooding in the south, the drought in the west, the hurricanes. State of Florida is now under hurricane warning. And so using crisis to propel forward the change in our water systems to really increase city livability is one opportunity that we do see. And as we move forward in the water industry, and one thing to think about the water industry, it's very, very conservative, and it usually only changes under crisis. And if we look at kind of how the water industry has developed and is now undergoing a pretty intense transition from its service-based sector to more of a resource-based sector, really our water services started in 1804 when the city of Philadelphia created a water supply works, which is now Philadelphia Water Department. And it wasn't there. No one drank the water at that time. You drank wine or other things, but it was mainly for fire protection. And so, and then in the mid-1800s, when we had the health outbreaks, the sewage systems were developed, and many cities started with combined sewers. And in fact, we are using much of that infrastructure still today from that 1800 time period. DC Water will say the median age of a pipe in DC is 79 years old. And so that's the median age. Half is older, half is younger. And so we're still using much of this infrastructure from the 1800s and how we developed. As we move forward to today, most cities, I'm going to grab that pointer that Lynn used, are kind of at this point of being a waterway city, where we're addressing point and non-point source pollution because of our regulations. But as limits on natural resources grow, we're forced to change again with diverse and fit-for-purpose water sources and really promoting waterway protection to protect against those algae blooms and other things. And where this is for a group out of Australia, will say our ultimate goal is to get to a water-sensitive city where we have kind of adaptive and multifunctional infrastructure and urban design that really reinforces water-sensitive behaviors. So when we look at where we've been and where we're going, it's kind of, for me, it's always positive to keep that transition in mind.
Teresa, like some folks are having trouble hearing you. If you might try to project or get closer to the phone.
Okay, I'll try again. Thank you. Hopefully that's better. And so, okay, so the International Water Association is developing what is a water-sensitive city. And this is a draft. They'll have their final out this fall at their conference. But when you really look at what is a water-sensitive city, they developed an urban water charter that first starts with the water services that are regenerative. Like Lynn mentioned, you reduce consumption through conservation. You reuse your water, you recover the energy, you recycle the nutrients, and you really replenish the surrounding environment. And that's part of it. But the bigger part of it is really water-sensitive urban design. And that's why we are working with the Urban Planning Association and others to really look at how do we design our cities to really bring water into the cities. So much of the industrial era, we either buried our streams or turned our back to them when we were designing the cities, and realizing that experience of water in the cities is really hard to come by. And it's and so much of the infrastructure is buried that we don't really experience water in the city unless it's an emergency, a flood or a water main break. And so really using water to increase livability in the ecosystem services in the cities. And to take that really means we need a water-wise community. We need to have our citizens involved. We need to look at the co-benefits and have sound governance that really is able to look at all of these issues beyond the kind of siloed nature in which the water industry works now. And so to do that, to look at beyond the institutional issues, the Water Environment Research Foundation, Water Research Foundation, and Water Research Australia in 2010 undertook a study that looked at how do we address the institutional issues that we face that really silo our water management, and what are those pathways to One Water. And they looked at 28 different case studies of communities that are getting to integrated water management or One Water management. And here is yet another definition of One Water, also commonly referred to as integrated water management, but it really looks at the urban water cycle as a single integrated system and the interconnectedness of the water supply, groundwater, stormwater, and wastewater. And the opportunities that Lynn mentioned include this regenerative infrastructure where we don't have waste, we just have recovery systems. And it's a portfolio of systems from central to decentralized, and it's a mix of gray and green infrastructure and increased recycling of the water, nutrients, and energy. And it's implemented, as Lynn mentioned, from a variety of scales, from the building scale to the city scale. And it offers economic opportunities in both the public and private sectors. And most of all, it increases social and environmental value for the community. And what this all boils down to is recognizing that water is more than just a service provision for the city. It's a key component of having livable cities. And so, and understand much of our legal and financial framework for our water service providers are based on providing a service of 1,000 gallons of water. And so trying to make this transition from service to resource management will be difficult and have several barriers, but is well worth it. So in looking at those communities that are already on their way, there were 6 key elements that were identified. And not every community has all 6 key elements, but these were the things that were kind of identified as how communities are transitioning. One is bold leadership, having people willing to work across the silos and take the risk of suggesting new and different ideas. The second is planning and collaboration between departments and organizations. The third is culture, knowledge, and capacity within the organization itself to be able to transition. Citizen and stakeholder engagement was in almost all of the case studies as very important. We need to involve our citizens more in water management. Economics and finance that support private investment, and regulation and legislation that really encourages both public and private participation in that. And an example in the regulation and legislation is San Francisco had to create a system of regulation for on-site systems to really motivate that decentralized approach in gray water and stormwater harvesting as part of their water supply thing. Now, being that we only have limited time here today and talking about the transitions needed, I really wanted to focus on citizen and stakeholder engagement, especially that I feel like the NGO sector plays a big part here and can really help move the water industry and water in our management of water in our urban areas really positively. And it really requires getting community support and trust. And so and learning to speak in ways that resonate with the public, which is not something that we in the water industry do all that well. And to really talk about citizen engagement, we also have to talk about the world of politics. It's what we hear very often as a barrier to integrated water management or even sustainable water management. And this is from John Nalbandian at the University of Kansas in the School of Public Affairs and Administration. He works with ICMA quite a bit on developing senior leadership staff at the city and county level. And this just kind of looks at administration or where the organizations, how they function along here from their activity is problem solving. They have experts. They ask, what do you know? And that's really around data, plans, goals, reports. And everything is very tangible: information, money, people, equipment. And the dynamics within that most utility and local governments tried to do is predictability, cooperation, and continuity. Put out 10 to 50-year master plans that they're going to go that way. And in the world of politics and local officials, and even really good politicians will operate in this way. Sometimes this can be perceived as negative, but really in politics, it is more about kind of playing a game within the problem solving. And it's not so much about what do you know, but what do you hear? What are people's passions, dreams, and stories? And the pieces are really intangible with interest and symbols. And it really is a currency of stories. And so the dynamics in how things work in politics tends to be more conflict, compromise, and change. Really trying to work through big water infrastructure in the political system can be very difficult. And there is one thing that John Nalbandian will often say is kind of that confluence of passion and facts. You know, in the, is there passion, yes or no, and is there a need for change? Is there facts to support it? If both are yes, there will be action. If you have a need but no passion, generally you'll produce a report and it'll sit on the shelf. If there's no need but there's a passion, that's generally a danger zone that some senior official will have to deal with. So in trying to really focus on community engagement and how do we drive change through the water sector, WRF did a survey of their kind of LIFT, Leaders in Innovation Forum for Technology program, and said what specific activities are most important to drive innovation in the water sector. And the first is broad access to performance data. And if you're using new systems, there might not be performance data, such as with green infrastructure and some of the on-site systems. And the second was pilots and demonstrations. And those pilots and demonstrations will drive that data that you need to convince people this will work. And so in looking at pilots and demonstrations, and this is really one to focus some here today, is this is what will help people see we can change. And I've just put up a few. There's several pilot projects and demonstrations that could be used. But one of rainwater harvesting is a cistern at the Art Museum in Tampa, Florida, that is really works in with the art and the museum itself. But these columns right here are cisterns. And you can hear the water gathering from the roof in these cisterns. And then that water goes to irrigate the landscaping in the courtyard. Also, Lynn mentioned the Solaire building in New York City, which was just a fabulous demonstration building. And here's their green roof. And who would not want to sit out on this green roof on a sunny day in New York City overlooking the harbor? And it's really using these demonstration projects to bring people in and have positive experiences is really important. And there's also green street projects, really moving to green infrastructure and how do we infiltrate stormwater to replenish the systems. And so this just happens to be one out of Shoreline, Washington. And so these demonstration projects of small, start kind of small, where you know you can be successful, And people can have very positive experiences in them, and you can collect data on how they work is a very key part to kind of bringing in these new technologies for managing our water system. And also, as we're doing it, we've disconnected the water system from our urban areas so extensively in the industrial area as we built. Really connecting people to water is critical. And doing pictures where they can see themselves around the water systems is critical as well, because people value what they can positively experience, and so they'll be willing to support, either funding or programs or other things where they want to be part of it. And so really including people in the pictures, it can be really hard to find pictures of water systems that include people. In the Confluence Park in Denver, you can see they've included how people will interact with the river within the city. And also, of course, Clean Water Services in Oregon has done quite a bit of river restoration, and just showing the connection and people experiencing that is critical. And it's what will help bring integrated water management around. And in a very kind of unscientific survey of communities, when I asked how important is branding of the initiative, how important, really having a good battle cry for what you want to accomplish, and 100% said very important. One Water LA has, a very well-known brand and is driven by the mayor. Philadelphia's Green City Clean Waters has lots of different things. They just launched their 5 Down, 20 to Go to celebrate 5 years into their combined sewer plan. They've reached their milestone, and now they have 20 to go. And Cleveland has their Project Clean Lake, the Great Lake Great Future, for their CSO work. And it's something that people can rally behind. And so that branding or slogan or rally cry is really important to keep an initiative going. And most of all, one of the most important things of really community engagement can be making it fun. The Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District in Cleveland uses Wally Water Drop, and Wally has a life of his own, and it's an amazing life. And everyone loves Wally Water Drop's adventures. And it really works for Cleveland in getting the community involved in educational activities. In the southwest coast of Florida, they've adopted a number of fertilizer ordinances that says you cannot put nutrient fertilizers down during the summer. And there's a Bee Floridian campaign that has the pink plastic yard flamingo as its mascot, because like most Floridians, although it's decreasing, the number that they're not native. Like the pink plastic yard flamingo is not native to Florida. And so there's a lot to be learned in the yard. And so, when I was in Florida, in Sarasota County, where we were using pink flamingo balloon hats to get people into line to tell them about, you don't need to fertilize your lawn during the summer, and you can go to the beach instead. And it was a lot of fun. We met our 12-month goals in 2 months by using these balloon hats as a draw to get people to sign up a fertilizer pledge. And so a lot of it is just make it fun, make it unusual, make it something that people want to be involved in, and you will make progress. And so that's just kind of an overview of some of the work that we've seen either at WRF at One Water Solutions for how integrated urban water management or One Water management is happening. So with that, I'll turn it back over to either Deborah or Diana or KB.
That's great. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks to you and Lynn so much. Really great overview and good examples. So please, everyone, please type in your questions into the chat box, and we'll take them as we come in. I'll go ahead and kick off the first one while we're waiting for one to come in. And talking about, you all gave a number of amazing examples from all over the place, and then Teresa, you talked about pilot projects per se. And I know that many of our members and community, and probably a lot of people on the phone, have been involved with or even in charge of pilot projects. And there's certainly the need for more, but also people interested in scaling those up or institutionalizing them. So to do that, what have you all seen as some of the most successful policies that start driving moving from the pilot phase to something on a more watershed or city or sort of broader scale?
Teresa, you want to try
yeah,
that?
I can tell you some of that. Now, it kind of depends whether it's public or private sector. Once stormwater, so much of the pilot projects have been around green infrastructure or really how do you get the stormwater management, say, for nutrient control or some sort of water quality protection target. And so we see communities adopting stormwater master plans. These pilot projects become part of master plans that include capital planning program. So, for instance, it may become part of a facilities plan where the green infrastructure is adopted into all of the capital improvements of public buildings. It can also be done through looking at how land development procedures work and using green infrastructure or rainwater harvesting or some of these techniques in private development, and there can be either LID manuals or green infrastructure manuals for private sector development. So generally you see the pilot projects lead, and then you see either master planning for public facilities and or regulatory requirements for private development, and really implementing these on a grander scale.
Yeah, and the case study I think that I would, which is still very much in play, that I would highlight is in the city of San Francisco, which is now earning quite a name for itself for both green stormwater infrastructure and distributed water harvest and rainwater harvest and water reuse on the building scale. And from my understanding, that came really because, and I don't know what preceded this, but the developers started demanding it and asking for it, and so the city created a big incentive program and then a set of policies and procedures that go along with the activities that are to support those activities. But you know, in one sense, it really came from the role of the private sector in asking for it and creating demand with the city and the utility was pretty key in trying to drive that to a bigger scale. And that theme is probably true in other places as well.
Interesting, great answers. We're getting good questions coming in, so I'm going to switch to some of our participants' questions at this point. We will get to all of them, but staying on the policy. One from Mitch was about what is the role of any state and federal policies to drive integrated water management in urban areas, sort of as a follow-up to what we were just talking about. If at all.
Yeah, I would think that the question might be, what are the barriers at the state level to integrated water management, and to start, in one's own situation, to be looking at those barriers and how to start bringing them down. I don't know of cases where the state has really been the driver behind it. Maybe I'm just in the wrong part of the country.
Well, I think the states have done some work in the water quality and the total maximum daily load implementation, in which kind of resulted on a federal policy. But there are, right now federal policy is a little bit hard to change and can be a barrier. And when you take, for example, what Lynn was talking about with San Francisco and the on-site building kind of distributed water supply systems and non-potable water through gray water and stormwater harvesting and black water, what we've seen there is barriers at the state and federal level and local communities coming together, almost like the way 10 state standards developed before we had EPA, local communities coming together to produce standards that they think are right for these systems. And then they're going to take that as a bottoms-up approach where they're going to take that to state and federal policy. So I think it really depends on the situation and the topic and how much can be done at the state and federal level due to politics and where do local communities have to come together. So that's kind of a non-answer, but that was a very difficult question.
Yeah, and I think especially for urban situations, the state is maybe either less of a player or a player in terms of some of the plumbing regulations and that sort of thing that they have that are barriers. But when it comes to incorporating the full watershed and things like TMDLs and nutrient management, yes, the state can be a driver there. And
yeah. So one question we talked about was sort of like, what are the resources that people need to move integrated water management forward? And we've gotten a question about sort of, has there been good economic studies or sort of cost-benefit analysis, multiple benefit analysis for integrated water management on the economic side?
Local communities have done some, especially those communities with combined sewer overflows that needed to implement large-scale green infrastructure. So they've done triple bottom line valuation or co-benefit evaluation, depending on the terminology, of like green infrastructure to the community and its ability to reduce urban heat island impact, reduce crime rates, and all of that. So those individual studies are out there, and EPA just awarded 2 grants to bring together life cycle analysis of green and gray stormwater infrastructure alternatives, and CSU is on a team with one of those, and the other institution is Colorado School of Mines. So developing those tools that allow that kind of life cycle analysis of at least stormwater, green and gray infrastructure are on their way, kind of on a grander scale than the communities doing their own studies. But there are studies out there where individual communities have looked at it.
And I'll add that we tend to think of that in terms of integrated water management in terms of green stormwater infrastructure. But if you think of some of the other pieces of integrated water management, like, let's say, a rainwater harvest system as an alternative to water supply, or the trade-offs with energy recovery and nutrient recovery and that sort of thing. There are, individual utilities or individuals, actual individuals will do their own cost-benefit analysis, and clearly it's penciling out, depending on the situation, it's penciling out because people are making choices to invest. But I know that for rainwater harvest, when you're not in a situation where you're going to be you're already connected to the city grid, the numbers aren't all that hard to make it work in a lot of situations. But it's going to be very context dependent. But don't forget that all those other pieces are part of integrated water management as well. It's not just about green stormwater infrastructure.
Well, and that's a good point. And the energy recovery, the fact that so many utilities have moved to energy neutral or energy recovery really shows the economics of that work as well.
Yeah.
And if the economics work, the utilities will move there in grand scale.
So it's interesting. So you're suggesting sort of the alignment, especially bringing in something like energy, can really help move a water agenda forward in this integrated water management context.
Yeah.
Right.
So sort of on that note of how things impact each other, we've got a really interesting question about, from Paula. Says, you mentioned reuse as a water management strategy to achieve water efficiency. However, too much reuse can also impact surface water in a negative way. For example, large quantities of water requested through indirect reuse permits, sort of getting at that question of, well, if we just say it's integrated, does that mean it's all good? Or how do we look at the trade-offs from these different parts of the water system?
Yeah.
For me, there's always an interception point. It's that, well, if a little is good, more is better is not always true, and that's true with reuse. And, you can see negative impacts from reuse, especially on the stormwater system. If you have a water quality permit load for stormwater, you can see increased nutrients. So you do have to use those principles of only use as much as you need, including reuse water, and fertilizer, to really make the system work. I don't know what your thoughts are, Lynn.
Yeah, and I think that one of the places where reuse really can be maximized and is maybe the lowest hanging fruit is in places where the discharge is otherwise out into the ocean or very quickly to the ocean, because that water really is being lost to the to the system as a whole, and in fact may be exacerbating some other problems. So it's in those coastal systems that I think that you can probably take it more to its extreme, and in inland arid areas where we have these bigger issues, or at least temporarily arid, with these issues of how do you maximize that? Where is how far can we take the reuse?
Yeah, that's interesting. Distinction there. Some other questions here about scale. What do you all think in terms of at what scale should integrated water management be applied to ensure sustainability across watersheds? And we talked about different scales today.
All of the above.
Yeah. Well, I call integrated water or one water kind of the art of the doable. And so you start where you can get started, where you can make progress and, really kind of making changes in the institutions or mindsets. And then you move, eventually you need to work across all the scales at the individual, the neighborhood, the city, the watershed scale. But, you get started where you can. And so that's my thought on it.
Well, and I think back to the slide that Teresa had that it was in one of her early slides that had those concentric ovals of the different kind of stages of leading all the way up to a water-sensitive design in the city. Thank you, somebody, for moving us backwards. And, the bigger you draw, yeah, there we go. So right now, I think that we are, this water cycle city is probably the easier step where, maybe the waterways city, where, you can take on these kind of building scale projects or a particular stormwater, permeable pavement parking lot over here, and you're thinking about these, the improvements in these siloed project by project way, but branching it out into really thinking about the design of the whole urban design of the city and then maybe even of the watershed, but certainly even at an urban level is hard, and it's going to take, it's the right scale, but to get enough people, so that the momentum is there where you can really get people to wrap their heads around it. Most places are still pretty far off from that. And so I think I like Teresa's statement of, it's kind of the art of the doable. And for most people, that's not doable just yet. And it's these smaller projects that are starting to lay the groundwork, and that I think NGOs play a really important role in setting expectations about and changing expectations about what is doable and thinking big.
Yeah, I think that's right, pushing the envelope. One question is we've sort of talked about how integrated water management we think of as a way, because we're bringing different sectors together, it potentially opens up new funding streams to fund or finance some water-related improvements. Have you all seen that that's actually the case, that, funding sources are coming together or new streams are opening up because people are using these more integrated approaches?
Well, I know from experience when we did an integrated water initiative, it saved money because we were able to bring like services together. And so by going through a business process review of looking at how within the utility, how you provided service, and you look at doing it together across, multiple water services, it did save money that allowed you to, use the funding that you saved to do some of these extra projects. And also, if you think of, utilities selling energy back to the grid, yes, that's a new funding source. And that's a more flexible funding source than their rates are. And so, yes, you can definitely generate revenue sources by taking this approach.
Yeah, and I'll kind of reemphasize that, especially when it comes to at the utility scale. Most of these, at least on the resource recovery facilities or wastewater facilities, they are very much looking at revenue streams that they can get from these different products. And in some places, the recovered water has high value. In other places, that's not very high value. But the biosolids, the energy, the phosphorus, and there are other things that one can recover from the stream as well. Those all have a dollar value that that can be self-driving. So that is a source of revenue, and it's independent of rates, which may have their own regulatory framework that goes with that. But in terms of, I think that a lot of people in thinking about this are thinking of grant funds or other sorts of federal or state funds that may be available. And I do think that there is, the people part of this is hard, but in theory that there should be funding out there either from, I think of transportation funding, public housing, or, HUD kind of funding, those sorts of things. That this is money that's being spent on infrastructure anyway. And to be able to align it with some really forward thinking about water is, I think of it as it's impacting the water one way or the other. So why not try to corral that money into having a positive impact rather than a negative impact on the water? And it's probably a matter of really making relationships with the people who are currently the receivers of that money to be able to influence them rather than be able to actually get the money oneself, but more to influence those who are using that money and influencing them to use it in a way that really positively impacts the concerns that one has in your location.
And I just want to follow up Lynn's statement with one thing of, there's a number thrown around that 40% of the urban area will be redeveloped by 2040. And so that's a great deal of private sector investment going into the urban infrastructure system, that if we think of how water can be brought into the design, there's another number floating out there that in Philadelphia, an apartment that overlooks a green roof can generate rent that's $100 a month more per unit than apartments that don't overlook the amenities. And so by bringing water in as an urban amenity and how we design the cities and really making it a positive experience, and thinking of how does our urban areas get redeveloped, we may be able to generate significant private sector investment to their benefit too, in really looking at things a bit differently.
Great. Yeah, I think those are a really wide range of responses that indicate some great opportunities for people to think about. I know we're getting some questions about sort of just the sharing of resources, and for just so everyone knows, these slides and this recording will be available on our website within the next week or so. And also sort of a question about the value of sharing demonstrations and resources about this. I know as part of this work for us, we will be putting together a forum or part of our website where people can access some of these resources about integrated water management. So definitely look for that in the coming weeks and months. So we have time for just one or two more questions before we end up today. And so I want to go back to Beth's question about green infrastructure retrofit projects. And are there large-scale studies coming out now about projects and information about how using infrastructure retrofits to reduce urban runoff volumes at really large scales? Has that been scaled up to the point where those are available that you're aware of, you all are aware of?
Well, most of the combined sewer communities that are using green infrastructure, which do include, Seattle, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Milwaukee, Chicago, all have projected studies from their models. And now Philadelphia has met their 5-year goal, and they will have they have significant monitoring in showing that, the green infrastructure is working to reduce the volume of water. I don't know the exact, numbers and rates of infiltration or anything else, but yes, those are starting to come out as far as monitored. There's a lot out there on what should happen with the modeling efforts that were done for these communities that have these combined sewers and are using green infrastructure to infiltrate and reduce the volume of runoff. But, now that more large-scale work is going in the ground, the monitoring is becoming available too.
I want to add on one thing with that. I think that one of a caution that especially NGOs need to be on top of is that for what I'm seeing a little bit of, not a lot, but a little bit of, is that as some of these cities are being pushed to, rightfully pushed to be able to capture more of their stormwater and reduce their combined sewer overflows, there is this, I've seen ideas and plans for, they don't call it this, but it's basically centralized stormwater infrastructure so that you lose a lot of the community benefits that make green stormwater infrastructure so attractive. But it's, of course, much easier from the cities or utilities perspective to do something like that. And so I think we need to be, not all stormwater infrastructure and green stormwater infrastructure is created equally, and we do still need to be kind of on tap and on guard about some of that.
Right, the sort of moving towards distributed systems, being an important part in some cases of integrated water management, sort of moving to changing the scale of things to make things. We didn't talk much about climate change today, but of course that's one of the benefits of decentralized systems is having that more resilience in these faces of big storms and so forth.
Yeah. And cooling and making your community a place where you can stay and that sort of thing.
And the cooling's an interesting one because a lot of the climatologists really are going to the fact that we'll need to use evaporative roofs, evaporative walls, and trees and shading to manage heat within the city. And so that's kind of a whole new service of water on the architecture side. So it'll be interesting to see how some of that gets brought in the future to the urban water management.
Cool.
But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, right. A whole other webinar, which speaking of, we're close for time, so we're going to wrap. Let me ask you, Lynn and Teresa, if you have any sort of final thoughts or questions for each other as we begin to close out today.
No, just that thank you for this opportunity. I think that you've opened an incredible discourse here that's really important, and I think that the watershed community out there and the relationships that they have with others in their communities are going to be just absolutely critical to advancing what we need to do.
I echo Lynn's thoughts.
That's awesome. Well, thanks. Everyone's virtually clapping for you, but really appreciate your thoughts and insights today and sharing your experience with us. So thank you. This presentation, as I said, will be available online for people who would like to flip through it or listen to it later. And just want to let everyone know that we've got our 2 next webinars in the series coming up. They're available, at least one for registration. The one on the September 14th is going to feature Mary Lynn Lodor from the Metropolitan Sewer District of Greater Cincinnati talking about their Cincinnati Groundwork Project. And then we've also got on that one Chris Sturm from New Jersey Waterworks talking about the Jersey Waterworks Coalition working together on sewer overflows from an integrated perspective. Then in October, actually we'll be having, this was mentioned today, we're lucky to have Paula Kehoe from the San Francisco Public Utilities talking about that city's non-potable reuse program, as well as Michael Garrity with the state of Washington, who's going to talk about integrated water planning and management in the Yakima Basin. So definitely look for those. I hope we'd really love for you to complete our survey that will be heading your way to give us some feedback on how we can improve these. So with that, we really appreciate everyone joining us today and your time, and we look forward to having you join us in September. So thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful